Yo, what's up guys? Welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to what's the most rural location in America. I did do a reaction like this, or somewhat like this, maybe like a month ago, and I can't really remember what actually happened in the video. It's just showed a location. Was it the most rural locations? I can't remember. But I think I predicted at the start of that it will be in Alaska somewhere, but it wasn't. But yeah, I feel like when it comes to the US, you've got so many regions that you could say are rural, like extremely rural, because it's such a big country. People will live. I'm assuming there's quite a lot of quite a high proportion of people that will live maybe in tiny little villages or whatever you call them. Is it townships in the US, or just homes in the middle of nowhere on their own, like a cabin in the woods? And that's what I picture with the US. But no, I feel like rural locations in the US are 10 times more rural than you'll get in the UK. Like I feel like UK, if it like rural in the UK would be like honestly half a mile from someone else. Like having a house half a mile from someone else is probably what I would consider rural. Even less than that, to be honest. But at the same time, maybe it's more talking about rural locations where there are, again, townships. I think it's a township, or villages, or whatever you want to call it, or towns that are then extremely far from like a major city or whatever. I don't know how this is going to judge it, but we're going to check this out. Hopefully going to enjoy. Hopefully you're all doing well. And let's jump into this reaction. It's good to know that my actual mic's working this time, so not going to have the same mistake as yesterday, but yeah, let's check this out.
Expansive country with such a diverse set of locations and geography. Something we've been blessed with due to our later settlement as a country is a few areas in the country that are still entirely rural.
Like, in these sort, I associate this with like, honestly, like New Mexico and stuff. Although it's like this might be Utah or something like that. But would there be possibilities for people to live in these sort of areas? Because I couldn't imagine people living here. I don't even know if it's possible because of is there going to be like electricity reaching here and stuff? Probably a stupid question, but like, yeah, I couldn't imagine people living in these sorts of regions, but maybe they do. And if you did, that would be fucking insane.
Looking across the lower 48, it's not a dense mapping of large cities, but instead a ton of farmland and rural areas that surround the cities. Rural regions are always something I found very interesting. The dynamic is entirely different from city life, so thinking about where these rural areas are and what life is like there is a question that can be fun to answer. So today we're going to look across the country for the most remote and rural regions and talk about why they're so rural and what life is like. Before this video starts though, please consider subscribing to the channel. We're so close to my lifelong goal of 100,000 subscribers. So if you enjoy geography content like this, let's start by getting a few things out of the way. The most rural place in the US is definitely in Alaska. The state is filled with so many areas of complete and total wilderness.
Why is this water in Alaska so blue? What the fuck? This looks like a tropical paradise. I say tropical, minus the mountains. And then you've just got the mountains in the background. This is a crazy picture. This must have been altered. I mean, probably not, to be honest, but that is a mad picture. It's like a blue lagoon.
With nobody around you for possibly hundreds of miles. There are some insane locations here, but like I say a lot on this channel, that is totally boring. If you wanted to know the most rural place in Alaska, it would probably be around here, where there are 0 people in this region. But let's move to the lower 48, where we might find a more interesting and relevant answer. So looking at
that region's probably the size of like Wales, or actually probably bigger than that. Like, that's mad to think.
48 states, and talking about rural areas, obviously the first place you'd think of is the western U.S. The difference in population density between areas east and west of the Mississippi is pretty stark. But actually there are just a few very rural and remote regions in the east as well. In fact, a couple of them are even in the original 13 colonies. The first of these would be northern Maine. Northern Maine, and specifically northwestern Maine, is probably the best example of an extremely remote area in the eastern U.S.
I was not expecting to see Maine here.
Looking at the regions north and west of Millinocket, there is basically nothing. This region has no incorporated cities or paved roads, being mostly dominated by mountainous wilderness and lakes. A lot of it is owned by the timber industry, with a good chunk of the land being owned by various companies, which has actually had a pretty big effect on the overall landscape over the course of history. The region's home to Baxter State Park, which holds the beginning of the Appalachian Trail and Mount Katahdin, the highest peak in Maine. This park is a good representation of the region, being founded for the sake of preserving the wilderness. And I think that needs to be remembered, because as you've seen with some of these images, Northwest Maine holds some of the most rugged terrain in this part of the U.S. So that's why the population is so low. In this square, the population is just 750, which
750? That's like are they all living together or what? Because you got to feel so alone.
I think is pretty insane.
Maybe people working and stuff.
More very rural areas can be found in the Adirondack Mountains of northern New York. This area does hold plenty of tourism, being home to the Olympics as recently as 1980. But specifically focused on the southwest quadrant of the mountains, the Five Ponds and Pigeon Lake wilderness, as well as the Black River and Ferris Lake wild forests, are home to really remote areas. Now, sure, there's more population here since state highways 28 and 8 run through the region and are home to some development. So the highlighted area is home to 3,500 people. But between those small valleys with villages like Old Forge and Eagle Bay, it is totally undeveloped. But to end out areas that are technically east of the Mississippi, if you go by the Mississippi River's most westerly point, there's the boundary waters of northern Minnesota. This area, known for its amazing canoeing, is pretty much totally empty. So, putting it pretty simply, this area is defined by former glaciation. Basically, if you didn't know, this area was covered by glaciers during the last ice age. So when they melted away, it left thousands of tiny lakes absolutely everywhere. And thus, the boundary waters were born. It's just a forest and water. So in this highlighted region, there's a population of just 400 people. But there are some regions even emptier than others. To the northwest of this is also Voyageurs National Park, which is a big, more touristy area. But it's still just beautiful wilderness, which is rural, obviously. So with that out of the way, finally we can move to the western U.S. where the magic happens.
The magic.
This region, which is much more mountainous and less fit for rural development, makes for some empty regions. Starting with the Great Plains, there are always still small towns, but the overall emptiest part is northwest South Dakota, above the Black Hills. And
I think the Dakotas and like Wyoming will be the most rural locations. I mean, they are just rural in general, the states as a whole. I think even the major cities there, I feel like you could consider rural because they're firstly not that big, and then secondly, they're just probably miles away from any other like major city or towns or whatever.
Missouri River. I'll give anybody $1 if they can genuinely name a city in this region, because geography is basically my focus in life, and I had no idea. This area is not fit for basically any form of farming, so the focus is mostly on ranching. Now, though this isn't as remote as some other areas, the difference in lifestyle is what stands out to me. There are native reservations for the Sioux tribe out here which live in very different conditions, and it's something I think you really have to see to understand. This also means a lot of these areas are very low income, and I thought an interesting example of how this is seen is this YMCA in Dupree, South Dakota, which looks nothing like what you'd imagine a YMCA to be like.
Wait, you have YMCAs in America? Isn't that for like in the UK we have YMCAs and they're for like, I think they're for like homeless people or people struggling a lot. I didn't know that it was like a thing that was out of the UK, to be honest. Maybe we got it from the US then. I mean, unless it's a different thing in the US, but that's pretty wild. I did not expect that.
Population of this quadrant of the state is 18,000. Going by lifestyle and overall feeling, it's extremely rural. Another good one in this region is West Texas and Southeast New Mexico. This area is much smaller, but it's home to Loving County, the least populated county in the nation, at just 64 people. This area has a population of just 1,000, and it's dominated by the oil industry, which pretty much single-handedly keeps it afloat. But that also means a lot of these cities aren't totally impoverished, and they're pretty well off because of the oil industry, as well as a bit of cattle. Residents of Loving County have a per capita...
This looks very nothing. This is like, I don't know how to explain this place. This just doesn't really look like a place you'd want to live. It's saying it's quite well off, but it just looks like it's sort of just here for the meantime. It's just such an interesting. You don't really get places like this in the UK. Like, you got this building and then you got all this like, I guess, parking space around it. I don't know. It just seems so wide and just so bare.
Income of 32,000. So this entire area is
but again, it is specifically for oil, so I guess that's part of it.
Different dynamic than some other rural regions. Getting into finally a couple of our most rural and remote regions in the country, Central Nevada obviously has to be mentioned.
Yeah.
Specifically, this massive block in the middle of the state. Now, this is the peak of the Great Basin. It's just desert and mountains, which makes for not only a very interesting topography, but also a pretty terrible place to live, which is reflected in the population.
I'm going to assume the population here, I don't think you could really live in this area, but maybe there's a small little area within this area that's livable. I'm gonna say it's because this is a big area. 35,000. Now, because Nevada's quite populated. 80,000.
This math
Although, would that be rural? I don't know. Fuck it, 20,000. I don't know. 20,000.
of 24,000 square mile chunk of
Oh,
land
was it 24,000 people?
and has a population of just 5,000.
Oh shit. Okay, I was a bit over the top. Damn. I mean, look, Nevada I can understand because it's just so deserty, but that is crazy.
Which is approximately 0.2 people per square mile. There's no water resources here or areas for farming, and mining is just about the only industry here anymore.
Yeah, like what brings you here unless you're born there?
Taking the town of Austin, for example, it's survived off relatively low production of silver and gold with a population of just 167. And that's what a lot of these communities out here end up being. Looking at Austin's downtown, though, it's not like the area is entirely desolate or anything, with Austin staying afloat now off of tourism, which works pretty well for them. But none of these examples have been the real most rural place in the lower 48, though. And I do believe this one's pretty hard to argue whenever you watch a video like this on YouTube, and it's this region of central Idaho in the Salmon Chalice National Forest. I've always found this area incredibly interesting, mostly because almost nobody talks about it. I mean, the average person is imagining Nevada or maybe Utah when you ask them where the most rural area is. But this part of Idaho is pretty much totally empty. This area of over 3,000 square miles has an estimated population of 37. And in actuality, that could be closer to 10.
Wow.
Which would put the population density at 0.003 residents per square mile. There's no cities, towns,
Why are you living there? I guess maybe if you're like taking care of the place. I don't know.
communities, roads, or anything. And it's the best place in the lower 48 to visit if you want somewhere totally empty. This land along the Salmon River is fascinating because there isn't even a high volume of tourism. You can go there and be completely isolated from anybody else, which I think is very interesting. There are so many other interesting rural regions in the U.S., though. I think the many aspects of day-to-day life in these places are worth studying.
Like, for example, like, I don't really know how engineering works and stuff, but in the last place, in Nevada, that town, for example, how are you getting water there? Do they just basically, I guess, use the tourism money that they make and then import loads of water that they can then use for drinking and washing and all this stuff? Because obviously there's not going to be any pipes leading to there. I mean, I assume there wouldn't be. I just wonder how it works, like how they get their flowing water and stuff. They just probably import loads of water, don't they? I don't know. I could be wrong. I did drive from Boise to Missoula back in 2012 with 3 friends on a concert tour. That drive was breathtaking. I believe it was the Lochsa River. The Allagash region of Maine is just logging camps and private off-grid camps. Basically just logging and outdoor sports, fishing, hiking. There you go. If I lived in a rural area, I don't know what I would do with myself. I'm from one of the most popular cities in the world. I mean, look, everyone has their interests, right? I'm the opposite. I was raised in a county of about 7k people. I'd be freaked out to live in a big city. Exactly. It's just like your sort of environment. I mean, would I rather live in a rural area or grow up in like New York? When growing up in New York, the chances are you're not going to be growing up in like the greatest circumstance, right? You're probably going to be living in quite a small home, unless you're from a well-off family. Hey, if I'm from a well-off family, I'll probably say New York, because you're probably living in the suburbs and you got sort of the suburban life, but then you got New York on your doorstep. But then, would I like to be this rural? Probably not. But I can understand like living in a smallish town with like insane scenery around you. I can see the appeal to that, you know, like growing up in that. So it just depends on the situation, because again, you could live rural and also live a pretty bad life as well. But it depends if they're both living good lives. Which would I rather live? I mean, I'm from a city, but I'm not from a major city. I'm from quite a small city. I don't know. I'd be happy to do either, to be honest. Just happy to live a good life. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed. And if you've been to any of these regions, let me know. If you're from these regions, if you're from this last region, let me know. I mean, this says there's like 10 people here, so I doubt it. But yeah, if you've been to any of these regions or whatever, I guess let me know about it. And did you feel it was as rural as it sort of comes across? For example, the one in New York, he says, has quite a lot of tourism, so that probably doesn't feel as rural as it is. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed this reaction, and until next time, like, subscribe.